My name is Carol. I'm 30 years old, and the truth is, I never thought I'd be the kind of woman whose life would unravel in front of everyone, especially not because of my own father. I always believed I had control. A steady job at the architecture, firm downtown, a close circle of friends who saw me as the composed one, and a relationship that, while not perfect, felt like it was heading somewhere real. People often said I carried myself with poise, with elegance. Maybe that's why it cut deeper when everything collapsed, not behind closed doors, but under fluorescent lights, in a room filled with whispers and judgment. It began on a Thursday. My father had been calling me all morning, 7 missed calls. I ignored them all. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I already knew what they'd be about. His tone had changed lately, more sharp than stern, more controlling than caring. Since Mom died 2 years ago, he had tried to take her place in my life in ways that didn't fit. He didn't know how to grieve, so instead he tried to dictate my career, my friends, my decisions. But I was no longer the girl who tiptoed around him. That Thursday morning, I was preparing a design presentation for a high-profile client. Everything had to be perfect. I had pulled an all-nighter, tweaking the floor plans and the lighting scheme until it met even my impossible standards. My assistant Mia brought me coffee, and I took it with a grateful nod. The boardroom was already being set up. Then, just before 10 a.m., my phone buzzed again. This time a text. "If you don't answer, I'm coming there. Don't test me." He knew where I worked. But he wouldn't. He couldn't. I silenced the phone. By 11 hours, I was standing in the conference room, heels clicking softly on the polished tile floor. The room was quiet, except for the sound of my voice and the faint rustle of papers as the clients flipped through my proposal. I was halfway through explaining the sustainable design elements when I heard the door open. I didn't stop speaking, not immediately. But the hairs on my arms rose. Something in the air shifted. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him, my father, tall, intimidating, gray streaking through his thick black hair, and eyes that had once softened with warmth now hardened into accusation. He was wearing the same brown leather jacket he'd had for years, and his expression, his expression, made my stomach drop. "Carol," he said, loud enough that everyone stopped what they were doing. I froze. My mouth went dry. "Dad, what are you... You really thought you could hide from me here? Pretend you didn't hear my calls?" I could feel every gaze in that room lock onto me. My manager shifted uncomfortably. The client leaned back, unsure whether to speak or watch. "Dad, not now," I hissed under my breath, walking toward him, hoping I could usher him out before things got worse. But I underestimated him. "You think you can ignore your family, your responsibilities, just because you're playing grown-up in this glass box? You think you're better than the rest of us now?" His voice was sharp, laced with bitterness. My heart pounded. "This isn't the time or place. Please leave." He laughed, a bitter, cold sound. "Not the time? When is the time, Carol? When you finally answer your phone? When you stop pretending your family doesn't exist? You think standing here makes you important? You're still the same little girl who ran crying to her room when things didn't go her way." I looked around. Nobody moved. No one came to my defense. They just watched. Some with pity, some with curiosity, others with judgment. I clenched, my fists, every muscle in my body tense with humiliation and rage. "You need to leave. Now." "Or what?" he snapped. And then something in me cracked. Not like a branch snapping under weight, but like a dam giving way after years of pressure. Or, "I'll call security." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. For a moment, even my father looked surprised. He stared at me, eyes narrowing, jaw tightening, then turned and walked out without another word. I didn't finish the presentation. After that day, things spiraled. That confrontation opened wounds I didn't realize had scabbed over. Old arguments came flooding back. Memories of slammed doors, of harsh words exchanged during sleepless nights, of the quiet grief we never processed after Mom died. My father had always been difficult, but now he was unpredictable. I started getting anonymous emails, screenshots of old photos, copies of private texts, strange messages that hinted at secrets I didn't even know existed. I thought maybe it was him, trying to manipulate me, scare me back into line. But the tone was too careful, too polished. Then one night, while sitting in my apartment, I opened my laptop and found a document waiting on my desktop. It was titled, "The Real Carol, What She Doesn't Want You to Know." I clicked it, hands trembling. Inside were details about my past, things even I had forgotten. A rumor from high school that never went public, a college application essay that I thought had been deleted years ago, notes about my therapy sessions, my breakup last year with Daniel, even a doctor's report from a routine scan. Someone was watching me. Someone was keeping track. I looked around the room as if expecting someone to leap out of the shadows. I knew then, this wasn't just about my father. Something bigger was happening, something calculated. Someone wanted to unravel me, and they were just getting started. I couldn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling until the soft glow of the street lamp outside faded into the gray of dawn. Every tick of the wall clock felt like a countdown I didn't understand. Who had created that document? I checked. Again, hoping it was a terrible prank. Something sent by a bitter ex, a bored coworker, or some sick online troll. But the level of detail, the tone, the subtle references to moments no outsider could know, it was deeply personal. It wasn't someone guessing. It was someone who had been close. By morning, paranoia had set in. I unplugged my laptop, powered it down, and threw a blanket over the built-in webcam. Then I went through every room in my apartment, checking for signs of intrusion. The door was locked, the windows secure. Nothing appeared touched. But the feeling of being watched, it didn't go away. Later that day, I visited the IT team at work under the pretense of getting my system checked for a strange file. The technician, a kind-eyed man named Devin, ran a scan. "No viruses," he said. "But that file, it was placed on your desktop manually. This didn't come from a remote source. You mean, someone had access to my laptop? Or your cloud backup? But yeah, not just random spam. Someone knew what they were doing." I thanked him and walked out, trying to appear calm. But inside, I was crumbling. The next blow came 2 days later when I was called into my manager's office. "Carol, there's something we need to talk about," Ms. Hughes said, folding her hands over a printed sheet of paper. My stomach sank. "We received this anonymous email last night. It outlines concerns about your emotional stability and accuses you of mishandling confidential client data. It includes snippets of internal emails and screenshots of design files." I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's not true. I haven't—" "I believe you," she said quickly. "But you need to understand. This is serious. HR is reviewing everything." I left that meeting shaken. It was clear now. This wasn't just emotional blackmail. Someone was actively trying to destroy my life, my job, my reputation, my sense of reality. I went home early and sat in the silence of my apartment. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called my brother, Evan. We hadn't been close since our mother's funeral. Grief had turned us into strangers, him with his silence, me with my stubborn independence. But now, I needed an anchor. He picked up on the second ring. "Carol?" "Hey," I said, voice barely steady. "Can we talk?" We met at a small cafe near his office. He looked tired, older than I remembered. As soon as I sat down, I broke. I told him everything. The confrontation with Dad, The file on my laptop, the sabotage at work. He didn't interrupt. When I was done, he exhaled slowly. I don't think Dad's behind this. What? I mean, yeah, he's angry and harsh and he crossed a line. But this? This is calculated. Dad isn't subtle? If he had something to say, he'd just say it. I wanted to argue, but he was right. My father's rage was loud and messy. This was something else. Silent, methodical, cruel. Evan leaned closer. Has anyone else in your life had access to your laptop? Your accounts? Anyone you broke up with? Roommates? I shook my head. No one comes to mind, except... He waited. Maybe Daniel, I whispered. My ex. Daniel and I had dated for 2 years. He was charming, attentive, and everyone adored him. But beneath that polished surface was a man who didn't like losing control. Our breakup hadn't been dramatic. It had been slow, bitter, and final. We hadn't spoken since, but he had once borrowed my laptop. He knew my schedule. He knew I kept journals. He even knew I stored old emails for reference. Evan narrowed his eyes. You think he'd do this? I don't know, but he's the only one I can't rule out. That night, I sent Daniel a message. I kept it vague. Need to talk. Urgent. Just 5 minutes. Please. He responded almost immediately. Sure. I've been meaning to talk too. We agreed to meet the next evening at a neutral place, a bookstore cafe we both used to visit. I wore a black coat, no makeup, and kept my hair tied back, hoping to feel like I had some control. When he walked in, he looked the same. Clean cut, confident, but the way he smiled, that cold, knowing smirk, set me on edge. I'll admit, he said, sitting across from me. I was surprised to hear from you. Thought you were too proud to ask for help. I'm not here for help, I said. I just want to know if you've been keeping tabs on me. He laughed softly. Carol, that's paranoid. Why would I do that? Because someone is trying to ruin me. And you're the only one who had access to my accounts, my files. You knew things no one else knew. He leaned back, studying me. You really think I'd go through all that trouble? You think you mattered that much to me? It was meant to hurt, and it did. But more than that, it confirmed something. Then how do you explain the emails, the document on my desktop, the anonymous reports to my office? He shrugged. Maybe. You've made more enemies than you think. And just like that, the conversation ended. I walked out, my hands shaking. Not because I had no answers, but because of the look in his eyes. That smirk. That satisfaction. He hadn't confessed, but he hadn't denied it either. Not really. I went home, more determined than ever. I started documenting everything, every suspicious file, every unusual login, every odd message. I kept a log, took screenshots, backed everything up, because now I knew. I wasn't just being targeted, I was being hunted, and I was going to find out by who. In the weeks that followed, paranoia became my closest companion. Every email I received, every browser tab I opened, every login attempt, I scrutinized them all. I'd become a digital detective, armed with instinct and fear. But that fear wasn't weakening me anymore. It was sharpening me. I installed password managers, enabled two-factor authentication on everything, and set alerts for any changes on my credit report, social accounts, or cloud storage. But no new attacks came. The silence felt heavier than the noise. It meant they were waiting, watching, and I couldn't sit idle. So I decided to visit the one place I'd been avoiding for months, my childhood home. I hadn't been there since my dad's public ambush, but I needed to see for myself if anything there connected. If this vendetta had truly started with him, or if someone else had picked up the thread. When I arrived, the house looked the same. A two-story relic of another era, with overgrown hedges and paint slowly peeling off the porch. The lawn, once my mom's pride, was patchy and tired. I knocked. No answer. The spare key was still hidden behind the loose brick by the flower pot. Dad had never been the paranoid type. I stepped inside. The smell of old wood, newspaper, and something faintly bitter filled my nose. It was like walking into a forgotten photo. I wandered room by room. Everything was dusty, untouched. My father wasn't living here anymore. He'd moved in with a friend after our blow-up, but his stuff was still here. In the study, I found his old computer. It still worked. I didn't need his password. He never used one. Most files were mundane: financial spreadsheets, old scanned receipts, property papers. But one folder caught my eye. It was buried inside a subfolder labeled Repairs. Not like him at all. Inside were scanned images of handwritten notes. Some were my mother's, her soft, cursive handwriting impossible to forget. Grocery lists, phone numbers, even snippets of poems. But others were mine. Private notes from my teenage years, journal entries I'd written on paper and torn out, about the night I'd overheard my parents fighting, about how I hated Dad sometimes, about how I blamed him when Mom cried. They had disappeared from my old journal years ago. I'd assumed I lost them. But here they were. Scanned, archived, dated. Why would he keep these? My chest tightened. In the back of the drawer, I found a manila folder labeled Carol Watch Notes. My blood ran cold. Inside were printed screenshots, some from my Instagram, some from my old text conversations with Mom, others from college forum posts. Nothing illegal, but invasive, obsessive. There were even sticky notes in his handwriting. Why is she posting at 3 a.m.? Same guy again in Feb? Investigate. New office ID, redesign file. This wasn't a father concerned about his daughter. This was surveillance. I sat on the dusty chair and tried to breathe. All the years I thought I was being judged, critiqued, monitored. I had been. My father hadn't let me go. Not after Mom died. Not after I left. Not after we argued in front of everyone. He had followed my digital life like a case file, and it didn't stop there. A folder inside labeled Calm Daniel shattered any remaining disbelief. Dozens of email threads between my father and Daniel. Some dated after we'd broken up. Subject lines like, "Need help with redirect. She's spiraling. Don't trust her to lead." I opened one randomly. "She's been erratic since the breakup. Refuses to accept advice. Her new job gives her far too much control. We need to ground her before she makes a scene again. RH. Another. Make it seem like a warning from HR. Nothing legal. Just enough to shake her up." They weren't just talking. They were collaborating. My father and Daniel had conspired against me. I stood up, nausea rising in my throat. The room spun. My hands were shaking. Why? What had I done to deserve this? The answer came from a photo tucked behind the folders. It was a picture of me at 17, arms wrapped around my mom. We were laughing so hard my eyes were shut. Her eyes, tired but warm. Behind us stood my dad, slightly blurred, watching. That was the year she was diagnosed. That was the year I started rebelling. That was the year he started losing control. This wasn't about a moment. It was about a story he had rewritten. One where he was the savior, the martyr, and I was the unstable. Liability, a threat to the narrative. I took photos of every page, every file, every email. I copied the hard drive onto a USB and left the rest untouched. The next day, I filed a digital harassment report with the authorities. I met with a lawyer, I met with HR. I laid it all out. For the first time in weeks, people listened. It didn't make the pain go away, but it made it real, on paper, in records, in action. 2 days later, my father showed up outside my apartment. He didn't knock. He just stood there. I stepped outside. "You went through my things," he said flatly. "You lied to me. For years." He shook his head, disappointed. "I protected you. You've always been emotional. You needed structure. You destroyed my trust. You collaborated with someone I loved. You stalked me. You're twisting it. I just wanted to help. You've always misunderstood everything." I stared at him. "I think you're the one who misunderstood who I've become." He didn't have a reply. I walked back inside. This time I didn't cry. That night, I posted a message to my private blog. I told the truth, not every detail, but enough to reclaim the narrative. The next morning, the post went viral. Messages flooded in, support, similar stories, journalists, lawyers, activists, but I didn't care about the numbers. For the first time, I was heard, not as someone's daughter, not as someone's broken project, as me. Carol, and I wasn't done telling my story yet. After my blog post gained traction, my inbox became a battlefield, half filled with love and empathy, the other half with anger, denial, and threats masked as concern. Some messages said I was brave, others called me bitter. But for once, I didn't feel the need to respond to every voice. I had spoken mine. I wasn't out for revenge. I wasn't trying to burn bridges. I just wanted the truth acknowledged, even if it made people uncomfortable, especially the people who spent years calling my emotions too much. My father didn't respond publicly, but I knew he saw it. I could feel the tension ripple through the family. Aunts started calling. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly remembered my number. My father's image as the dignified, morally unshakable man was cracking, quietly, unevenly, but cracking nonetheless. And yet, in the silence that followed, I felt a strange grief. Not for him, but for the relationship I thought I could salvage one day. That fantasy had been a slow death, and this was the funeral. One night, about a week after the post, I received a message from Daniel. "I'm sorry." 2 words. It didn't make me angry. It made me laugh. He'd spent years subtly manipulating me, feeding lies to my father, and now, this? A weak apology typed behind a screen? A sentence crafted more for his conscience than my closure? I didn't respond. Instead, I moved forward. I took a leave of absence from work, not because I was broken, but because I deserved rest. I started therapy again, this time with someone who didn't tell me to calm down when I cried. I joined a support group for adult children of narcissistic parents. Their stories mirrored mine in ways I couldn't have imagined. It was painful and liberating. In one of the sessions, someone asked me, "If he apologized tomorrow, would you forgive him?" I thought about that. Forgiveness isn't a door you open for someone else. It's a window you crack for yourself. When the air inside becomes toxic. I wasn't there yet, and maybe I never would be, and that was okay. Months passed. I started documenting my journey, not just the pain, but the healing too. I wrote about boundaries, control, emotional gaslighting, and the quiet courage of walking away from people who raised you. Publishers began to take notice. A podcast wanted to feature my story. A friend offered to help me turn it into a memoir. I didn't care about fame. I cared about resonance. Because if even one girl out there, sitting alone in her apartment, doubting her memory, questioning her worth because someone she loved kept rewriting her story, if even one girl read my words and whispered, "Me too," then everything I went through would matter. One rainy afternoon, as I sipped tea near my apartment window, I saw him, my father, standing on the other side of the street. He didn't move. He didn't look angry, just weathered. I didn't go outside. I didn't wave. I didn't cry. I just watched him for a moment. Then I closed the blinds and turned back to my work. Because I wasn't that girl anymore. I wasn't the daughter begging to be heard, to be understood, to be loved on someone else's impossible terms. I was Carol, a 30-year-old woman who had been gaslit, broken, betrayed, and still found a way to rebuild, not out of spite, but out of truth, out of breath, out of her own damn voice. And this time, no one, not a lover, not a father, not 100 poisoned whispers, could take that away from me. I didn't just survive my story. I wrote the ending, and now I was starting a new chapter, one with no apologies, no permissions, and no more shadows behind me. Only light, only forward, only me.